Hey everybody, Smart Silver Stacker here. Hope you're doing well. So today we're going to discuss the escalating World War III, the nascent global conflict that we are watching play out before our very eyes. We're going to talk about Russia and their gold hoarding, and also just the impact that this conflict will likely have on safe haven assets and also industrial metals. So let's get to it. Buy your gold and silver at SD Bullion. Right now, new customers can get gold or silver at spot by visiting sdbullion.com/new. Okay, so a lot of the price action thus far this week in the gold price and the silver price has been a result of a safe haven bid due to geopolitical escalations. We've seen rocket attacks in the Middle East, back and forth, signs that that conflict is escalating. And really the biggest piece of news today is that President Biden, lame duck President Biden, has given permission to Ukraine to utilize U.S. supplied ATACMS missiles for strikes inside Russian territory. And simultaneously, Vladimir Putin has updated Russian nuclear doctrine such that an attack by a non-nuclear state, when it is aided by a nuclear state, can be met with a nuclear response. So this is definitely upping the ante in the conflict in Eastern Europe. Now, is this going to lead directly to a nuclear exchange? I suppose anything is possible, but it doesn't seem like that is exactly what this is about. But what this does do is it escalates the conflict and it increases the possibility for a direct conflict between NATO and Russia. And that is a conflict that very much does have the possibility of going nuclear. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean we're going to be in for, a giant intercontinental nuclear conflagration. It could be as simple as a tactical nuclear weapon being used on a battlefield in Eastern Europe. Of course, all of this is largely speculation, but an event such as that could be enough to trigger a massive global economic crisis, as markets are already very fragile in this debt-addicted fiat Ponzi scheme type economy that we have, and it seems very likely to me that we could be on the precipice of a major disaster. That is likely why gold and silver, the traditional safe haven assets, have been catching a fairly significant bid over the past couple of days. Gold's back over $2,600. The price of silver rose by more than 3% yesterday. Last time I looked at the chart today, it was slightly in the green, basically flat, after giving up some gains that it had earlier in the session. But somebody is buying safe haven assets here. And the reason is because they are fearful of the potential outcome of this global conflict, and I think rightfully so. Now, there was another interesting story from last week regarding Russia, and this all ties into one another. Now, the story was that Russia's gold reserves have now hit a record high in value, topping $207 billion for the first time in history. That follows the story that we covered recently regarding Russia's announcement that they would be increasing their gold purchases by 35% in the month of November. And of course, we also can't forget the fact that the Russian State Fund recently announced just a little over a month ago that they would begin purchasing silver for the first time in history. That announcement seemed to trigger a big run-up in the silver price in the month of October when silver almost hit $35. So let's recap a little bit of the price action that we've seen in the precious metals over the past weeks and months. So there was that announcement by Russia that sent the price of silver much higher. There was a lot of uncertainty leading up to the election. I think everybody's freaked out by the pace at which the debts and deficits have been exploding under the current Biden administration. And then once the news that Donald Trump was the president-elect, that he had won the election, broke, we saw a major sell-off in gold and silver. We saw a correction. Gold dipped below $2,600. Silver dropped briefly below 30, dropping from a high of, almost 35. So that's a pretty significant reduction. Now, how can we account for that? I think in large part that had to do with some optimism surrounding the U.S. economy on the election news. And also, Trump had announced that he wants to make the U.S. the crypto capital of the world probably getting us ready for CBDCs, the central bank digital currencies. And keep in mind that the bank stocks also took off following the election of Donald Trump. You saw risk assets like tech stocks and just the stock market in general explode, likely as the markets anticipate a policy of lower interest rates and easy money under a Trump administration. What we saw was capital flowing into those assets, the stock market and cryptos, and it's got to come from somewhere. So what were people selling? Well, they were selling their gold and silver. And, entities like Russia probably very glad that investors were doing that because it allows them to accumulate more gold on the cheap. And that is very likely what has happened with the decline in the precious metals. I'm sure that the BRICS nations, foreign central banks, the entities that have been gobbling up record amounts of gold over the past several years, I'm sure that they moved in and were buying up the dip hand over fist. But now that we have these escalations occurring around the world in Eastern Europe and the Middle East and elsewhere, there's North Korean troops now allegedly operating within Russia. So that brings in a whole new theater to this conflict in the sense that North Korea is now directly involved. I think some of the optimism that investors were experiencing on the news of a Trump election regarding perhaps peace and geopolitical normalization, Trump kind of campaigned on the idea of ending the wars around the world. So that optimism was perhaps justified, but that is beginning to diminish. And we are beginning to see the geopolitical risk premium being priced in once again to the precious metals. And I'm really under no illusions here that the war has been averted or ended. Leave me a comment down below if you think that Donald Trump will be successful in ending the war in Ukraine, as he stated was one of his objectives during the campaign. Do you think he'll be able to end the war in the Middle East in any kind of a timely manner? I can't say that I personally am really optimistic about his ability to accomplish that, but it would certainly be a good thing if he did. And, it may just be beyond his control at this point. Certainly there's a very powerful interest among banks and, military industrial complex, etc., that would like to see these wars continue. So, will Trump be able to flush them out? Does he even really want to? Maybe he's just been installed as the war president here. A lot of things are possible. But I think as stackers, the important thing to note here is that gold and silver remain relatively cheap. I mean, they're both well off their highs from earlier this year. And if we do see these geopolitical escalations continue, it's not likely that they're going to remain suppressed for very long. Another aspect of this conflict that I think we should be aware of is just how much silver would end up being consumed by the military-industrial complex in the event that these wars continue. One of the statistics that I see floated around all the time is that cruise missile has got a whole monster box of silver in it, right? 500 ounces. Now, I don't think that that's entirely accurate. Not that I think the plans for cruise missiles are open source, so, we have to remain a matter of speculation. But they probably do use a fair amount of silver in their circuitry and in their electronics. And the same goes for all of the drones that are being constructed. I do think it's fair to say that any major conflict that we embark on will lead to considerably escalated industrial consumption of silver, a trend which is already well underway. And that is contributing to annual supply deficits in the silver market. And so those will likely become exacerbated in the event of a conflict. So another reason to get some now before that takes place. Also, as I mentioned earlier in the video, hopefully a nuclear conflict does not ensue here. But if it does, it really has the potential to rattle markets. Now, I know somebody's going to be out there commenting, if the nuclear war happens, you won't need bullion. Nothing's going to save you. Well, look, if a tactical nuke goes off in Eastern Europe, it's not going to physically affect, our safety necessarily here in the West. But what it could do is it could trigger a massive global economic crisis with far-reaching repercussions. And so that's something I think we should be prepared for. For those purposes, one of my favorite things to stack is junk silver, 90% silver half dollars, quarters, and dimes, something that you could actually use as money. We know you can use this as money effectively because it served as money for many, many decades here in the United States, over a century really, that the primary currency for your everyday person was silver coinage. So this stuff we know works, it's tried and true, and it's still widely available. Premiums have come down on this stuff recently as well. And in a crisis, this is one of the first things that sells out and then investors pile into. So I think now is an opportune time to get your hands on some. If you want to go for gold, gold coins, these are going to be a little tough to take to the grocery store with you or to trade with local farmers. because, how many potatoes, how many chickens, how many eggs are you really trying to buy? A 1 ounce gold coin is going to be kind of tough to do that with. So you might want to check out Goldbacks. These are a circulating gold-based currency. There's 1/1000th of a troy ounce of gold in each one of these notes. And in the event of a global economic crisis, one in which, supply chains are disrupted and we see just kind of havoc, you might have a much easier time getting your local farmer or rancher to take one of these than rapidly devaluing fiat paper. You can check them out at goldback.com. There's a link down in the description. So suffice to say, we are witnessing some significant geopolitical escalations. I mean, who knows? Maybe even the deep state is trying to kick off a broad conflict here before Trump gets into office in order to make it more difficult or impossible for him to achieve his stated goal of peace. I mean, I don't pretend to have any knowledge of the inner workings of these things. It's all just speculation at this point, but I do think that given these developments, it is wise to get prepared. If you want to see more videos about gold, silver, and the effect geopolitics can have on those markets, make sure you check out the video that is popping up on your screen right now. Thanks for watching, everybody. Smart Silver Stacker out.